to the Sci Cafe. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Okay, welcome everybody. You have tuned in to the Apalachicola National Estuarine Research Reserve's Sci Cafe. This is a monthly presentation, generally on the fourth Thursday of each month from 3 to 4. The series is about research being conducted in and around the Apalachicola watershed. It brings together scientists and residents in an informal setting. The program is about an hour in length, and we will save time for questions. So today we welcome Dr. Steve Leitman. He's going to give us an overview of a new project he's working on to develop and quantify scientifically defensible river flow metrics that can be used as an evaluation criteria to test potential modifications to the federal reservoir operations on the Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint river system. The project aims to improve ecological resilience for the Apalachicola River floodplain and estuary while minimizing upstream impacts to upstream stakeholders. Dr. Leitman has studied and worked on projects in the Apalachicola watershed for over 40 years. We've had him here on Sci Cafe, and we are so excited to have him back. Unfortunately, his camera's not working, but we will pay attention to the slides. So please save your questions to the end, and we'll get to everybody's questions and comments. So Steve, take it away.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. If it works with everyone else, I'm fine taking questions as we go through it too.
Okay, so, you can just raise your hand or type them in the question box. We'll be watching for them.
Okay, so we'll be working on looking at the quantification of metrics, and the project is funded by the Pew Charitable Trust. And the project team consists of Ken Jones, myself, John Tracy, Steve Morey from FAMU, and Chad Hansen and Kim Bransford are the people from Pew that will be working with us. So this project is going to examine alternative let me move this. I have a little box that I'm afraid if I click it and take it off, that I won't be on here. Okay, excuse me that people can see you. You've hidden. Okay, anyway. So we're going to do a research project that will examine alternative reservoir management approaches aiming at enhancing the ecological resilience of Apalachicola River and Bay. And my focus on this concept of resilience comes from a comment Ed Camp made to me at the front of the ABSI project, where he said that one of the important things to understand is with the Apalachicola Bay's collapse is that you need to look at it as the bay is a very resilient ecosystem that was able to handle a great variation in climate, in inflow and conditions. And when a resilient ecosystem like that collapses, you need to really think what pushed the system to the edge so that it could collapse, not necessarily what was happening when it collapsed. And I think that was a very wise way to look at this. And so what we're going to be doing is generating performance metrics and then modeling these metrics with regard to reservoir operations in the basin to see if there's ways through flow that we can improve management. And in looking at metrics, that's one of the points that I'd like to, okay, first of all, we're not talking about water use necessarily in Georgia and Alabama, but okay, so project overview. Our goal is to develop and test the ecological metrics that will expand resiliency without having serious effects on upstream users. In other words, we're trying to maximize what's happening downstream in terms of resilience while minimizing what would happen upstream. So we're trying to work within the boundaries of what you can do within the system. And one of the things that we're doing differently in this project than other projects is that we're going to be looking at how you make changes when there's ample water to support changes, not how do we do better when we're at an extreme low flow. And in this basin, it is possible to run into situations that there's not much you can do about it, but just hope that the bad situation ends. And I think it's important when you look back at like the ACF compact and when you look at the lawsuits and all, a lot of the focus was on how do we deal with extreme situations. And to me, the question is how do we deal with the basin when we have water to actually deal with it? And we don't want to try and take water from one stakeholder, but we want to identify metrics that would allow for to have better future decision making. And I think this is important because if our goal is to ultimately change how the basin is managed, we need to have our upstream partners also involved in trying to make those changes, not have the confrontation between different parties. And one of the things that you need to understand with the Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint Basin is that the vast majority of the basin is in Georgia and Alabama, and consequently, a vast majority of the flow that comes down the river comes from Georgia and Alabama. So whether we like it or not, we're going to have to work with them. So operationally, management of the system's flow is controlled by the 2016 Basin Water Control Manual. And I was involved with working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in evaluating this manual. And the Florida Basin environmental criteria have not been developed other than to look at endangered species and not to a point where we can say particular flow regime is more or less better for the basin. Now, the concept of flow regime is important when you look at rivers like this, and when you look at the estuary and its resilience. And by flow regime, I mean not just the magnitude of flow, but the magnitude, the duration, the frequency, the timing, and rate of change of flow. And one way to think about this is to think about in terms of yourself if you have a fever. If you have a 102-degree fever, it means you're not feeling well. Now, if you have a 102-degree fever and you have it for 2 or 3 weeks, it's not the same as if you have it for 2 or 3 hours. If you have a 102 fever and you keep having a fever go away, come back, go away, come back, that's not the same as having it once. If you have a 102 fever before you're about to go out on a vacation somewhere really nice, or if you have a 102 fever when you have some work responsibilities that you don't necessarily want to do, it's not the same thing. And if you get the 102 fever real quickly while you're driving somewhere, or if it's slow to develop, it's not the same. And it kind of works the same with flow when you look at the estuary. With the 5,000 cubic feet per second, if you have that for a day or two, is not the same if you have it for 4 or 6 months. So when we look at flow, we need to look at it in terms of a regime instead of looking at it in terms of a magnitude alone. So the current operations right now are definitely, to me, biased towards upstream interests. And there's a reason for that, in that when Florida chose to get rid of the navigation project in 2000 by saying we don't want any more dredging of the river, they also got rid of releases from upstream reservoirs that supported navigation, and those were the largest releases that the reservoir system provided. And there were a lot of problems with how they did navigation, but then losing those flows was not exactly helpful, especially when you consider the fact that in the Apalachicola River, we've had a concept called riverbed degradation. And that means that when you put in a dam, you're cutting off sediment flow from upstream, and geomorphologically, there's a new equilibrium established in the basin, and you have a systemic lowering of the river, and consequently, the flows that inundated the floodplain, which is important for providing nutrients to the bay as well as for the river ecology, that's changed. And so we're in a situation of not getting the water that we used to get from navigation while having the river lowered because of a dam for navigation that causes less inundation. Metrics and alternative management approaches, they need to be understood, debated, and accepted by Florida stakeholders. Developing metrics, to me, is a process that needs to be shared. One second, let me just turn this. Excuse me, didn't turn my phone off. I had someone call on me. I just dumped them. So the metrics need to be developed by Florida stakeholders, and the metrics need to be, science should drive metric development, and we need participation by experts, that the process is credible and it reflects the diverse needs in the system. Okay, so some key questions that we want to address in this project is that what flow regimes changes are needed to enhance the resilience of ecological functions for species, for habitats? What is the predefined standard for better or worse? What do we call making something better or worse? How do potential changes in flow affect upstream uses? How do we quantify effects? And how can we modify flows within the context of available water to meet criteria? And how can these decisions be made transparent? So it's quite a challenge. Okay, so to do this project, what we're going to be doing is using a model that was developed during the ACF comprehensive study, and it's developed in a program called Stella. And so first of all, the reason we use model data instead of historical data is that if you look at flow at Jim Woodruff Dam, since it was built or since we started collecting records, that you have a period where the flow had no dams above it. You had a period when you had 2 dams, then 3 dams, and 4 dams. You had a lot of changes in how the reservoir system was managed, and we've had changing consumptive demands over time. So it's very messy and kind of hard to read it. If we take a model, we're able to have present day demands and present day operations, and then using a flow set that represents sort of undisturbed flows or unimpaired flows, as they call it, then we can sit there and impose reservoir operations or alternate reservoir operations, and we can impose different demands on it and say, relatively, how does this affect the water coming into Florida? And so the metrics would define flow parameters. After we use the model, and we can define reservoir operations, and we can define the flow coming in, and then we'll get out river flow. And from that, we can look at floodplain inundation and impacts to salinity. And then we can develop metrics of what we consider to be better, what we consider to be worse. And as I said earlier, the metrics need to look at the magnitude, timing, frequency, duration, and rates of change of flow, not just how much water's coming down. They need to be based on science and stakeholder input. And we have to use available data. We don't have the time to be creating new data, which means that over time, as we learn more, as more data comes in and all that, metrics can change. They should not be considered static. We do not know everything about the river. So the project team commitment that we're going to be doing is that we're going to be preparing information in advance for consideration. And so what I'm going to be preparing is series of PowerPoints. There will be audio PowerPoints in an MP4 format, and allow people to look at these prior to the workshops or prior to meetings. And I want the workshops and any meetings that we have to work more as a seminar where people can look at the information beforehand, think about it, take the time, and then be able to discuss any questions they have, any comments they have, or whatever. And support documentation will outline the metrics, would outline literature to support metrics. It would outline model output and comparison of different changes to management over time, and what previous workshops, what they resulted in. And what we want from participants is to review material, identify and prioritize evaluation metrics, provide expertise data on trade-offs, review outputs, and help shape recommendations. And essentially, they'll serve as an ongoing review panel. So we look at this project as a long-term collaborative process. So we're going to be holding a series of 4 reports over the next year, or 4 meetings, workshops. And the first one will be in December 2025. And the important point I want to make about the workshops is that they're going to be highly technical, and it will definitely be going into the weeds, and we're going to try and keep participation down. So we're not going to try and have everybody at the workshops. But I am more than willing to commit to doing science cafe presentations after each of the meetings with the technical stakeholders, provide all the material that were handed out to workshops, discuss what was presented at the meeting, and receive additional input. And with that, I would just like to open up and get comments, questions from everyone.
Okay, let's see what we've got so far. Does anybody want to come off mute? I don't see any hands raised. They might be just still thinking. People may not be able to come up with questions just yet.
Well, even about the studies or about whether they think it's a good idea to have. Anita and I talked, and we can either do it as science cafe or special presentations. Just schedule however we want. But
Jim Estes has, Jim Estes has a question. Jim, you want to just come off mute? You should be able to take yourself off, but
hello, Jim. Good to hear from you.
You too, Steve. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
So this is kind of a question or a comment, I guess, really a question. I don't know enough about this stuff. That's kind of reactionary. So I'm sure that you are aware that the Corps is, considering doing some dredging, and then I presume after they do that, they may or may not do windows. I guess depends on when they're planning on having the navigation season. And as far as the flow goes, the problem that I saw in the past was, they would store up water. They would have their window. I think it was usually 2 weeks or 10 days, something like that. And then they would stop it off. And of course, I'm sure that you're aware that, there was some concern about fish, and I presume also nutrients that are trapped back in the floodplain. So is there a way for you, when you're doing this project, to kind of look at if they're going to be windows, how the best way to do that is?
Absolutely, Jim. And I have gone over with Fish and Wildlife and talked to the Corps about the navigation. And what I have been advocating for them to do, one of the key parts of navigation is what you call the reference profile. And that's what flow are you trying to provide a channel at? And I have pointed out to them that if we look at managing the reservoirs differently, try and provide it at a higher flow, that it would require less dredging, it would have better inundation of the floodplain, and it would cost less money.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And I think that would be great. And also, Jim, I'd like to talk to you after this sometime soon too, because I was talking to the people on the project of having you be involved informally, if not formally, with this.
Okay, sure, I'd love to.
And I also heard recently about some of your work with otters.
No, that wasn't me.
That wasn't you, another Jim Estes.
Yes, sir. Don't know anything about otters except for I know I don't want them in my fish ponds.
Okay.
that's great. Next we have John Alber. John, you should be able to unmute yourself. You're self-muted, so. Okay, here we go. You should be able to speak now, John.
Shoot is the operative word.
Should, yeah. I don't know. Let me see if he typed his question out. Okay, he did, and let me. Has the Corps brought into your modeling approach? Has the Corps brought into your modeling approach and goals?
Bought into, not brought into.
Bought, yes, bought.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Because we used my model in developing the biological opinion for the water control manual, I went through a 2-year process with the Corps of calibrating my model and their model. And they have put down in writing that the two models are calibrated and work together. And so as far as buying into my model, they've accepted that my model gives valid results. And the advantages over my model, and I don't see the tools as competing, but the advantages I have over mine is that I can do a model run of 74 years of data in about 20 seconds. And it takes the Corps with the tool they use several hours for their models to run. And the reason is theirs does a lot more fine things than is done with just the flow in mine. But the advantage is, and mine is also more flexible. So as far as going through and looking at different operations and finding a screening tool, I think my model has a lot more possibilities. So it's better. And what it allows me to do with the fast runtime is really to do a lot more different options and to focus more on the results instead of having a very complicated model to work with. And so I went over with Fish and Wildlife Service with Ken Jones and I, and we talked to the Corps, and the Corps aware of what I'm doing. I'm talking to them, and what role they'll play, I guess, depends on their lawyers.
Good point.
Did that answer your question, John?
I don't know whether he has the ability to speak, so he's self-muted. But he can type in comments in the question box. I had a quick question, and I don't see any other questions at the moment. You were talking about riverbed degradation, and
Right.
I didn't quite grasp. You said that, was it due to the dredging, the riverbed is lower, which makes it harder for the water to reach the floodplain. Is that true?
It was not dredging. It's actually a physical process. You cut off stand coming into the river. And so what's happened is that starting at Jim Woodruff Dam, it's dropped maybe 7 feet plus at a given flow.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens over a broad range of flows. And so the whole bed of the river has dropped over time.
Okay.
And if you go to somewhere like near I-10, you'll see fish landings that are out of the water. And you're thinking, like, who would build a landing to put a boat in where you can't get to the river? And the reason is those were done a long time ago, and the relationship between the river and flow was different then. It's changed that much.
Wow.
And it extends down below Blountstown. And so consequently, at a given flow, right now we top the floodplain at 14,000 CFS. I would guess it was probably more like 9 or 10 before. And so it's changed the whole relationship between the river and the floodplain. And then that's changed the delivery of nutrients to the bay because that's where they come from. A lot of it comes from the river floodplain.
Yeah.
Another thing we're going to be doing in this work is that we're working with Steve Morey, who worked with APSI developing the 3D model of the bay. And we're working on how to statistically include salinity at some of the key oyster points so that we could look at flow relative to salinity. And an important thing to understand is that when the Corps developed the water control manual for the ACF basin,
Mhm.
they look at the Apalachicola Bay and Apalachicola River as two separate projects.
Yeah.
Apalachicola Bay is part of the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway. Apalachicola River is part of the ACF project for the three states. And so consequently, when they went through and selected their preferred alternative, they did not look at effects on the estuary.
Okay.
And,
Yeah,
and
that's
they are ecologically connected, obviously.
yeah. We all down here noticed that, but they not included it. John Albert had a.
Okay,
Go ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, when they did that, that was back in the 1940s when they designed the project. And people didn't understand that well about relationships between rivers and flow. And I can understand back then not doing it. I don't understand not changing it now because we know better.
Yeah, true. John Albert had a second part question. It says Woodruff certainly causes degradation for the upper 60 miles or so, but doesn't dredging also cause degradation in certain critical reaches and aggregation in others?
I don't know. I wouldn't call that riverbed degradation. It's not systemic, but I would say that the disposal of material does cause degradation of the river, and it changes the whole way the river works. And one thing to remember is that this is an alluvial river, and the amount of sand that moves through this river at higher flows is a lot more than they could ever dredge.
True.
But that doesn't mean dredging has no effect. And a lot of the problem with the disposal has been like filling in of the sloughs and such.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Oops, hang on a second. Got John. I don't see any other questions.
Well, I'd like to ask people if they would be interested in wanting to continue to have presentations related to this project as it goes along, like I offered.
Okay. Well, you can type into the questions box that you would be interested and just put your email in there. And I should also be able to get the email off the GoToMeeting program. It's a platform. So if you're interested in staying in touch with the project, just leave us a note and I'll get it off of here and we can get it to Steve. Yeah, I think it would be great. And definitely, I think there's a lot of stakeholders who would be interested in the project. And as a valuable partner, the estuary would certainly love to partner with you on this and help convene stakeholders, whether it be virtually or in person.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say quickly before we get off about the metrics issue is that the state as a whole has never specifically defined metrics. We went through the compact saying we wanted more water, and we went into the lawsuit focusing on how do we get more water with demands, but there was a lot of problems with how we were doing that. But the point that I want to make is that we really need to define what we need and how we need it in terms of a regime, in terms of timing, duration, and how we could modify operations. And so that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
And the only metrics that were used in the water control manual were the ones for endangered species by for Florida, and that was done because that was the limit of the jurisdiction that the Fish and Wildlife Service had.
Yeah, I remember that. Well, and at one of the partnership meetings, I believe it was May, our facilitator Betty had the Corps came down, and that was one of the questions they said is we need to know, you need to quantify what you're looking for. So I think they've mentioned that a couple of times. So. All right. Just checking one more time. We do have Joel Trexler. Joel, you want to come off mute and ask your question? Or maybe, I'm sorry, Jim. Jim Estes. I'm not sure if you ask a question or if you just put your name in the question box. I think that's what it might be. I'm going to assume that's what it was. So, well, Steve, it's always delightful having you, and
Okay.
I'm looking forward to the project and really interested in the outcomes. So
It'll be an interesting year.
yeah, great. And you mentioned the first meeting, the first technical meeting will be in December?
In January, I believe.
Okay. Okay.
I think it got moved from December to January.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you at December. Our Margaret Davidson Fellow is going to give a Sci Cafe on what he's been doing here at the Research Reserve. So we look forward to seeing you then. That will be on December 17th. And Steve, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. All right. And this will be recorded, so it'll be available on our website in a day or two.
Okay, well, have a good afternoon, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Bye.